This is the Italian Real Estate Podcast, here to help you with the ins and outs and basics of Italian real estate, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com.
Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Italian Real Estate Podcast, presented by Italian Real Estate Lawyers. Of course, we are back at it again with Italian attorney Marco Permunian. How are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I am doing great, thank you. And in this episode, we wanted to talk about purchasing property in Italy. Shocker, I know. Big surprise here on the Italian Real Estate Podcast. But we wanted to talk about how fast it could be possible to purchase a home in Italy. What can you do to help the process to be able to go faster? So Marco, I'm going to leave this as a very broad and open question for you. How fast can you buy a home in Italy?
Well, in theory, the process could be really fast. There are some steps that can be avoided, and I'm going to describe those steps in this episode, but it could really be done in a few days or a week. Of course, practically speaking, generally on average, it takes much longer, but in a perfect world, there are no limits in making this happen in a few days. So say, for example, you agree with the seller that you're going to meet with a notary next week to just sign the deed that transfer the ownership from him or her to you. That could happen if you are able to find a notary who can just do the deed on that specific date. If you're available, if the seller is available, then you become the owner instantly. Now, practically speaking, generally it takes a longer period of time because you want to be protected, because you want to do things right, because you follow all of the steps that are suggested in the Italian system. But let's talk about now what is, say, the average quickest turnaround for buying properties in Italy. So you need to submit a proposal to the seller through the real estate agency if one is involved. And of course, we at Italian Real Estate Lawyers can make sure the process goes really fast. But the proposal is something that normally you want to do because it protects you, because you have put in writing the terms and conditions that apply to the transfer of ownership, at least the initial ones. So what you normally do is you submit a proposal through the agency or through your attorney, if there is no agency, to the seller. And the seller has a limited amount of time to accept or deny your proposal. Normally it's 7 days, but it depends on what the parties want to do. So if you want to set a shorter period of time, you can do that. Of course, it could be against your interest because the seller doesn't have the time to materially get back to you so quickly. So generally speaking, 7 days is the suggested timeline or deadline for the seller to give you an answer through the agent or through your attorney, or directly if you're in touch with the seller for whatever reason directly. After the seller accepts your proposal, you might want to enter into a preliminary agreement. Again, this is to protect you because between the preliminary agreement and the final deed of sale, you have all the time to do all the necessary checks and due diligence on the property to make sure that everything is in order. But in theory, you could also skip the preliminary agreement and just use the accepted proposal as the preliminary agreement and just go straight to the deed. So you could just schedule a deed for the transfer of ownership shortly after the proposal has been accepted. Of course, you do need to use a public notary in Italy for the transfer of ownership. So you will have to contact one and make sure that they're available to meet you and the seller on the desired day. And notaries are busy. And since there is a limited number of notaries in each Italian region, and they're public officials, they tend to be quite busy. So it might not be possible to meet them immediately after the proposal has been accepted. Also, if you were planning on getting a mortgage, normally you contact the bank between the moment in which the proposal was accepted and the final deed. And of course, if you have to deal with the bank, the timeline will stretch a little bit. So you will need to make sure that the bank will give you the loan. You will need to provide financial documents regarding your financial situation. So of course, if you are in need of getting a mortgage from an Italian bank, the timeline will be much, much different. But if there is no mortgage involved, it's generally a fairly quick process. Of course, you don't have to be a resident of Italy to be able to purchase a property in Italy. Of course, you can purchase a property through an agent, but if you have to give power of attorney to an agent that acts as your attorney, in fact, that will also probably increase the timeline because you need to sign the power of attorney before a notary in your country and then get it legalized. And of course, we at Italian real estate lawyers can help you do that. So we can provide the power of attorney that you need to sign before a notary in your country. But if you're using an experienced professional, that will not cause major delays. We're talking about just a few days. And it's, of course, something that can be organized as in advance as possible so that you maximize the outcome and just optimize the timeline as much as you can. Of course, if you're going to use an unexperienced professional, that's going to make a huge difference because they don't know how the power of attorney needs to be, they don't know when it needs to be executed and whatnot. So it's very important to use an experienced professional to make the process as quickly as possible. Also, something to keep in mind is that if you have to give power of attorney to somebody else or a lawyer or Italian real estate lawyers, if you're using our services, you might want to consider a little bit of extra time just to be able to sign the power of attorney before a notary and send it to Italy. Of course, we're not talking about major delays, but of course you need to allow for the necessary time to execute the power of attorney and send it to Italy.
Well, that's really interesting. And I think that actually, even on that line of thought, I would also imagine that if someone's maybe not even a native speaker of Italian, that they might want to leave and allow for some extra time for proper translations to be made. So that, for example, I know something that at ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com, what you guys do is help your clients to be able to understand what's going on, what's happening, and in the best way possible.
Of course, in this episode, we are talking about getting a property quickly in Italy, but you don't want to overlook details. You want to execute the transaction properly and just make sure that you don't overlook important details. And that's what we're here for, to protect our clients from any liabilities and to make sure the transaction is done as properly as possible, but at the same time, as quickly as possible.
It's really amazing that you guys are able to be there throughout the process and help your clients along the way. I mean, especially you guys already have quite a bit of experience across Italy that you guys help people from the southern tips of Sicily, all the way to the very north, all the way to the borders of Switzerland and Austria, as well as France, Slovenia, whatever. You guys have been all around the country. But something else that I'm curious about would be also how fast it would be possible to move to Italy once you've already purchased your property. I mean, for some people, I can imagine this might be visa reliant and that there could be factors involved in that regard. But what would you say from the time that you've purchased the property, that all the I's have been dotted and the T's have been crossed, how soon can you actually be in your own home?
The answer could depend on which country you come from. There are citizens of certain countries that do not need a visa to enter Italy as tourists. So, for example, if you're an American citizen, you can just relocate to Italy, though for up to 90 days. Of course, the European Union is planning to introduce the so-called ETIAS, which is an online system where you have to register before you travel to Italy for tourism. And of course, we have done episodes about that. So far, that is not in place, so you don't have to do anything if you are an American citizen if you want to travel to Italy with the purpose of staying for up to 90 days. Of course, things change if you are a citizen of a country that requires a visa for you to be able to travel to Italy, even for tourism. For example, if you are a citizen of Egypt, you will need to apply for a visa even if you want to take a 10 days vacation to Italy, and the visa is released by the Italian consulate or embassy in your country. But like I said, if you are a citizen of the US, Canada, or those countries that are considered to be in the list of friends of Italy, so for example, the US, Canada, Mexico, many countries in South America, the UK, South Africa, or Australia, and many more, then you don't need a visa. Of course, if you want to stay for longer than 90 days, then you do have to get a visa. And to get a visa, you need to go through a process through the Italian consulate in your country. Now, that process can take a number of months, meaning that you need to book an appointment with your local Italian consulate, prepare all the paperwork for the appointment. And for example, if you're applying for the retirement visa, you need to provide your financial or income statements. And again, we have talked about the retirement visa extensively in other episodes, but you do need to get to the appointment prepared. And so if everything is in order, the consulate will basically contact you back after 1 to 3 months to tell you, yes, your visa was approved, or no, your visa was denied. And then after that, you have 3 months after, of course, the approval of your visa, you have 3 more months to relocate to Italy. So say that in the worst case scenario, it could easily take 6 months to get your visa approved. Generally speaking, there's a 3 months wait for the appointment at the consulate, and then there's a 3 more months waiting period to hear back from the consulate. But of course, the process could take even less. So basically, in a best case scenario, you could potentially be able to just get an appointment and get your visa approved by the consulate in, say, 1 to 2 months. Of course, people have been asking me, can I do this in a week or 2 weeks? That's highly unlikely. So say the best case scenario could be 1 to 2 months to get your visa approved and, be able to travel to Italy. Worst case scenario, 6 months.
Wow. That's still, even in the worst case scenario, quite a reasonable amount of time for getting a visa. And Marco, my question now is, say, for example, someone who is not of Italian descent in the ideal situation and they want to purchase a property in Italy, what would be roughly the fastest that could be possible to purchase a home in Italy and go through this whole process?
The fastest could be between a couple of weeks and a couple of months. Of course, if you need to get a mortgage, the timeline will be different, like I said before. And also that is different from the average. And the average is probably between 2 and 4 months.
Well, Marco, thank you so much for making yourself again available for this episode of the Italian Real Estate Podcast. But of course, if anybody's needing help to find their home in Italy, their perfect dream home, how can they get in contact with you and your team?
People can contact us through our website, italianrealestatelawyers.com, or give us a call. Our number is on the website.
Well, absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're interested in more about purchasing property in Italy, renting property in Italy, and where to do so, be sure that you're subscribed to this podcast on YouTube, as well as our audio-only podcast. But of course, if you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, that means you're also automatically subscribed to the Italian Citizenship Podcast, a project where Marco and I get into the details about how to legally make Italy your home. And if you're interested in more about life abroad and living abroad from the perspective of a dual citizen expat, be sure to come over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, or you can search on Google, YouTube, or your favorite podcasting app of choice for Not Your Average Globetrotter. But of course, again, we have been here with Italian attorney Marco Permunian from ItalianRealEstatelawyers.com. I'm Rafael Di Furia, and we'll see you all next time for the next episode of the Italian Real Estate Podcast. Later.
Thank you.